lights. Thank you very much. A little lead in here, but hopefully we'll fill out. As you see, I'm once again seated. I'm still quite weak despite, too many medications. Let's see if I manage to insult all the faculty at this university today. All of them, for not being vulgar like myself. Of course, today, what is the term I now have today? If Tuesday was about me being vulgar, today it's about, what's the line? A terrible woman. Today, I get a nasty, I knew terrible was a nasty. Okay, so once again, let's see if I can inspire all you young women to be as nasty as possible. If there's anything that's coming out of this grotesque election cycle that I appreciate, it is the foregrounding in rhetoric and in the media, and I think in general, the general population's awareness of feminism. That was a term that Hillary Clinton couldn't own at the beginning of her campaign. It was as though they were trying to pretend she was a normal candidate, i.e. male. But because it's gotten so gendered and ugly in the kinds of arguments back and forth, suddenly many people are realizing that feminism isn't a movement of your mothers or ones your mothers hated, but rather an ongoing battle for equality. Just as we are in the midst of battles for equality for persons of color, etc. And I know over teaching 20 years here at Berkeley that there was a great confidence or complacence among young women for decades that feminism was behind you and that you didn't really like the term and you didn't really want to be allied with it, you didn't need it. And at one point I was teaching women artists in an art history class and a feminist point of view, as I always have. And some young women came up to me and said, I didn't really know why you were going on and on the way you were until we had that very famous, respected male modernist from the East Coast come teach here for a semester. And we took his class and couldn't believe he taught no women artists. And he's turned us into a feminist. I thought that was such an interesting lesson. When they were in my class with, sort of the badgering mother saying you should care, many did not believe my arguments were as pressing as they were. But there was nothing like facing omission or denigration or sexual harassment to make women realize that feminism is something you should all own. It should be part of your awareness. And of course, you men have become so great. In general, I think young men are great and are owning the term feminism as well. It's all relevant, believe it or not. I'm not just speaking from from my bed of illness in some delirium to you, although you need to know that I get out of bed for the first time in 24 hours and come and talk to you. without having eaten, without having gone downstairs, without having left my bed, and I somehow managed to roll out. And because of, remind me your name?
Maggie.
Because of Maggie! I have it, who saw me limping along from the parking lot. And I said, you better rush ahead. You can't walk as slowly as me. I have Italian soda, so we're going to be fine. And next week and from the rest of the semester, I'm going to be just one kick-ass, nasty woman. Okay, so let's start with today. This is just me rolling out of bed after listening to the debate last night. That's true. But it's also pertinent to today's lecture, which is on modernity and women artists. There's nothing like reading. Well, let me first get started with us talking about how I had to introduce you to the issue of gender and gender difference for you to even begin to understand the concept of the flaneur. And Kaya Butt's Bridge of Europe always serves a great purpose at telling us about this kind of question mark posed by the autonomous woman out in space, if we read her as autonomous, or whether we need to see her as chaperoned by the man, and why is she just a little too far from him to make us sure? And by the way, are her clothes vulgar? Potentially. Part of the ambiguity. Is she a little overdressed for a good bourgeois woman? Okay, so the kinds of questions about a very strict set of parameters about how you have to behave to be a good French bourgeois woman. Okay? And you know that I already gave you that quote by Marie Bashkirtsev, and we'll move on to it in a minute. Let me just pass these various paintings that thematize. The way that you can see, again, look at all three of these paintings. Look at the Bridge of Europe. Look at a detail of Rainy Day. Look at the Loge. And think about how all three place the woman in some kind of ambiguous relationship to the man in ways that implicate her own morality, sexuality, okay? As though we can't quite ascertain her virtue unless we can do it through her relationship to these men, okay? So how indeed, and here's one last set of pictures that's just one of the most devastating of them all. Manet's portrait of Monet painting in his studio. This is such a depressing picture. Okay, this is Manet painting Monet out there making those absolute fantasies of ours. Those beautiful river views. I would like to own 4 of them. Okay, they are desirable. And Manet, typically Manet, makes it into a social situation. Even out in the middle of nowhere. He's not on a sidewalk with people, but he gets himself close to the boat. He shows Monet painting on his easel, looking to the right. And what does Manet put in the middle? Monet's wife. This is Camille. Okay? And this is her job as the wife of a landscape painter. That looks fun. Don't it though? And who else but Manet would turn that lateral view, that horizontal looking at the beauty of landscape into a confrontation with a woman in her social status? The man is so consistent in his painting. We will not talk about in his person. He is always interested in that. He is always interested in that misfit. And you've done the bar at the Folie Bergère. Start to think about the ways in which Manet posits the relationship between women and men. And the woman as, second-class citizen, no doubt. Now I show you finally a self-portrait of Marie Bashkirtseff, the woman whose quote is on the back of this handout that I've handed out to you before for your paper. The quote that was, remember what I long for is the freedom of going about alone, etc. Without, what is she? She's so encumbered. That's the freedom which one cannot, without which one cannot become a real artist. Do you imagine that I get much good from what I see, chaperoned as I am, and when in order to go to the Louvre, I must wait for my carriage, my lady companion, my family? This is a competent painting. It's a painting of a woman who puts her palette to the fore in her composition. It's a kind of the most glorious part of the composition, we might say, is that mess and impasto and sensual play on her palette. Marie Bashkirtseff also paints in the studio in 1881. Women artists studying a boy. Now, you need to know, in terms of setting up women artists in this period, you need to think back to the land of Jacques-Louis David. And you need to think of the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture, and you need to think about the role of the male nude as central to academic achievement, to artistic achievement. Well, in those days, women weren't allowed to study the male nude. Okay? Here is a compromise, 80 years later, in which they're doing a study of a boy. But the question of whether women have access to the human body, particularly the male body, is one always posed by women, the making of art by women. And it's no surprise that we're going to see self-portraits today. And the notion that women, if they didn't have access to the male model, only had access sometimes to the boy. That was at the Academy Juliet, I believe. They did always have access to themselves. And the notion that women turned themselves into their models as the most available and closest term should not seem surprising to you, right? And yet you'll see how much that feeds into, here's the problem. This is the feminist fundamental problem. Constructions of gender, stereotypes, right, are incredibly incoherent, inconsistent. That's what's important. Okay? So on the one hand, you could argue that women could not make history painting, could not paint from the male nude, because they did not have the cognitive capacities. They were not intellectuals in the early period of the 19th century. Okay? Then, when women are offered the model of the flaneur, the roaming eye, they can seem locked out of that mobility. So in one case, they're being locked out of the academic studio where they would study from the nude, which would be a controlling environment. But they're also locked out of the notion of free mobility. Okay? When women were locked out of history painting in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, they were associated with the lesser genres. with still life, with landscape, with portraiture. They were deemed not intellects, but eyes. All they could do is observe. They couldn't create great history painting. They couldn't do Oath of the Hirata. Then, when the men shift to what we call the lesser genres, when painting is reconstituted as a matter of the eye, right? What you can see is what you should paint. Suddenly they're locked out in another set of conditions. In this case, you can't be a good bourgeois woman and be a roaming eye. So at the very point when art's definition seems to invite women to be considered equals to the men as artists, at that very moment when the shift is to the lesser genres that were always considered their forte as still life painters, as landscape painters, as portrait painters, then they're described as being incapable of the description of modern life because they can't go roaming around. I want to point out the biographies of some of these first artists I'm going to show you two. I tell you that Marie Bashkirtsek was born of Russian nobility. She traveled extensively in Europe. She studied at the Académie Julian, which was what this was a painting of, an academy for women, one of the few institutions to accept women. She was famous, as you know, for her diary, written from the age of 13 and called, this is the name of the diary, I don't make it clear, I am the most interesting book of all and still in print. That's lovely. It's a lovely 13-year-old title for your memoir. But note the last line. She dies at the age of 25 from tuberculosis. Now let's go on to Eva Gonzalez. Here is Eva Gonzalez's box at the Italian Opera, a painter Manet rightly admired, much in ways that were sometimes insulting to his friend Bertrand Morisot. Here we have a daughter of a Spanish naturalized French novelist and a Belgian mother, born in Paris, studies with a society portrait painter, then in 1869 with Manet as was his only pupil, exhibits in the salons from 1870 on, not the Impressionist exhibitions, but the main salons, and dies at the age of 34 from complications from childbirth. Okay? We have two women with partially foreign origins attempting to be ambitious and successful painters in Paris, both of whom obviously had some incredible sense of ambition. Ambition as painters. And both of them have these tragic lives cut off. Jeremy?
What was the salon's stance toward accepting women artists in the exhibition?
It had become more normative. The Academy, when it was founded in the 18th century, only allowed 4 women artists out of 160. But the notion of showing women in the public salon had become far more normative. But it would be to 2 different kinds of audiences. Okay. Look at another painting by Eva Gonzalez to give you a sense of these kinds. Notice that you have looked at paintings that could be mistaken for self-portraits. This is actually described as a nanny and child. But this is such an interesting painting, isn't it, in relationship to the Loge by Renoir, with the woman looking out and the man not kind of not looking from behind. I'm having flashbacks to last night. The looks from behind. She's controlling the situation, the dynamic between them, having him in profile there. Okay, so self-portraits, portraits of their worlds, feminine spaces. This was all deemed what was appropriate for women to paint. They were not gonna go backstage, right, at the ballet. They were not gonna go downstairs to the laundresses. They were not gonna depict prostitutes on the terrace, right? Again and again, they're not gonna go to those spaces of illicit sexuality that the men are attracted to. This is not the Café Concert. They are not describing the vulgarity and sweet delicacy of Teresa's gross mouth. That interest in a kind of extreme, deviant sexuality of working class women is not what these middle class women are going to be able to identify with in their painting, right, and represent. They're going to have to position themselves, especially if you're Bertha Morisot, who you see in the photograph here and in a self-portrait, right? Especially if you're a French bourgeois woman, you're going to have to associate yourself with appropriate sites of French bourgeois female propriety. Okay, she is not going to break rules. She is a wife. And as a French woman, she's subject to these codes even more than the foreign women. Okay? And I'll go into that some more. We see Bertha Morisot in Manet's paintings. We have here his balcony. She is in the foreground. It's clear that Manet had a very intense relationship to the wife of his brother. Because she marries Edouard Manet's brother. She is his sister-in-law. She is extremely talented as a painter. She's also extremely beautiful. And Manet will be trying to kind of constitute some working relationship with her that at once shows his regard for her, his respect for her, and yet is belittling to her. Okay? Let's see her in an absolutely gorgeous painting, The Repose. He never shows her negatively, but he shows her as what? He shows her as his model, as his sitter, right? He says, oh, Bertha Morisot, you were magnificent. Let me make you feel like shit by painting you this beautifully, this elegantly, this economically. There is no painter who would look at a portrait of themselves like this and not go, oh, I might as well give it up. This is superb. It is a superb Manet painting. And I want that sense that what Manet is showing is his incredible economy, right? His incredible facility. The way he can just lay down that black hat and those black bows, like that white ribbon at Argenteuil, right? He can do it in this lavish improvisational style. I wonder why some people are leaving. Okay. He makes a painting that says, I can do it, and I can do it so easily. And he can, right? And he messes with her by making paintings like this with letters to her. Are these meant to inspire Bertha Morisot as a painter? Or to make her feel she'll never be adequate enough? I want you, okay, so let's see where my slides are going. I want you to see the difference between how Manet, and I don't know I have this on the slide list. This is Manet, as you see, portrait of Eva Gonzalez of 1870. Add it to your list under the Manets. I want you to note the difference between how he paints Victorine Murant and how he paints his only student. I hope you see why I set up this comparison, right? Where Victorine Murant and Bertha Morisot are likened as women. He can paint very straightforwardly, interestingly. He's interested in that psychological return gaze. But Eva Gonzalez is painted as a painter, right? And he won't give that to Morisot. So here's the man that I've been celebrating with you and Tim Clark for his incredible use of the direct return gaze of women, right? And here, suddenly, it's being inflected a little differently, right? Where suddenly that direct return gaze also seems to situate Morisot as the portrait sitter, and Eva Gonzalez, who does not return the gaze, as the painter. Okay, that's an interesting potential critique. But let's get to the painting that is the most famous moment in the interchange between, this is Morisot. I already have shown you her self-portrait, the late self-portrait. Here's the mother and sister of the artist, 1869 to 70. And as I say in parentheses after this, retouched by Manet. So turn the page over and look halfway down the handouts, the quotes, and see Bertha Morisot writing to her sister Edma about Manet's work on her portrait of her mother and sister, 1870, exhibited at the Salon of 1870. Tired, this is Morisot. Tired, unnerved, I went to Manet's studio on Saturday. He asked me how I was getting on, and seeing that I felt dubious, he said to me enthusiastically, "Tomorrow, after I have sent off my pictures, I will come to see yours, and you may put yourself in my hands." Underline that. You may put yourself in my hands. I shall tell you what needs to be done. The next day he came about at 1 o'clock. He came at about 1 o'clock. He found it very good. We're talking about this painting, except for the lower part of the dress. He took the brushes and put in a few accents that looked very well. Mother was in ecstasies. That is where my misfortunes began. Once started, nothing could stop him. From the skirt, he went to the bust, from the bust to the head, from the head to the background. He cracked 1,000 jokes, laughed like a madman, handed me the palette, took it back. Finally, by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we had made the prettiest caricature that was ever seen. The carter, the man with the wheelbarrow, was waiting to take it away. He made me put it in the cart, willy-nilly, and now I am left confounded. My only hope is that it shall be rejected by the salon, right? My mother thinks this episode is funny, but I find it agonizing. I put in the painting I did of you at Lorient. I hope they take only that. Do I need to say anything? Now, pretty clear. James, what's wrong with this picture? I don't mean the picture.
Okay.
What's wrong with what happened?
I mean, he just changed the entire meaning of the whole thing.
Yeah,
Like every little piece that he could do.
he took away her authorship, right?
And that's not good.
And by doing so, implied every gesture he made on top of her gestures was better, right? And it's a picture of her sister and her mother. Back off. This is my picture of my sister and my mother. Okay, one thing to pretend you're just going to fix the hem. But then to do a painting that in the end she says was a caricature, and a caricature sent to the salon to represent her, she doesn't want it to be accepted. Right? This is such a sad betrayal of our love of the man who shows women looking back. We could reframe Manet as, yes.
Then this was accepted.
Yeah, I believe it was shown there, yeah. Mhm. We could say Manet is the man who likes women to look back at him. It's pretty devastating because I love Manet. But this is a deeply problematic episode, and one that was not going to help Berta Morisot feel more of a right to a long artistic career. It's all the more problematic for Morisot because her sister had stopped painting when she got married. They were both art students. So holding on to female bourgeois domesticity and an artistic career at once was difficult, and Manet knew it. Morisot was his sister-in-law, as I've emphasized. So let's look at some of the Morisot paintings. No surprise, she paints her sister again and again. A sister who, as I told you, had given up painting, Edma, and is pregnant here. So there is a kind of poignancy to this exchange as well. The woman artist who's trying to stay a painter as she paints her sister who has given up being a painter. Both of them married, both of them good bourgeois women, right? Morisot's paintings can sometimes be incredible. This is as weird as a painting can get. Eerie in its doubling. And again, a sense, again and again, of her situating herself in a domestic bourgeois environment and trying to find visual interest in how she paints such an environment. But it being very much, if we say Manet's painting was all about Victorine Miron, you can see the extent to which Berta Morisot's paintings have to be about her family, her female family members, herself. And part of why they sometimes can encompass landscape, for instance, these two pictures, the view from the Trocadero, and this is Lorient. Part of why she's painting that scene is what Griselda Pollock walks you through in her essay, The Modernity and the Spaces of Femininity, or whatever it is. A long-standing, helpful article, where I tell you in the back, summarizing it as I do for you all, that women artists did not paint a significant, and this is Griselda Pollock, did not paint a significant number of impressionist subjects. Unlike the artist flaneur, women artists did not depict bars, cafes, backstage at the opera, laundresses at work, female nudes, etc. Instead, they described, quote, other spaces of modernity, suburban and domestic spaces. And then she sees two patterns in women artists' construction of space. The tendency to depict divided spaces within the same picture, with foregrounds occupied by women clearly separated from background spaces. And also, and she sees this as an overall tendency to compression. Let's go to the composite. Okay, so one thing you'd have to say about any woman artist you're showing on the final is that they did not tend to depict a whole array of topics that are considered central to Impressionism. And the Impressionism of a Degas, for instance, or a Caillat. But also, that when they do depict spaces like these, that there is a compositional characteristic to these. Maggie, can you walk me through that? What is she seeing?
Like in regards to the Pollock?
Yeah, well, like in this painting, can you show us what she says is happening?
Yeah, so she says that there's like the separation of them from the background, so you can kind of like see the layers, I guess, in the painting of like them in the forefront and then kind of like the city in the background, and they're clearly divided by like a large space.
So yeah, so it's both, there is a large background from which they're separated. So there is this sense that they're placed in the foreground, but that there are sort of dividers between them and these distant backgrounds. Okay, even when it's something like this. All right, the sense that it's describing a female occupied space that is understood somehow to be perhaps irredeemably divided from that larger view. Now that really is an important argument for this picture, okay? Because this picture shows us what, Ferris?
That there's this division.
Shows us the division. Just get stupid and start telling me what you see.
So there's a daughter or like a little kid and two women in the foreground and then a whole city in the background.
Yeah, what city do you think that is?
Paris.
Paris. Okay, yeah, so women and children occupy the space of this female artist. She's in the suburban space of women and children. And where is Degas and Caillat right now? Roaming around over there. Right? All of that just distant view of a densely populated urban space. That place, that Paris, that excitement of being the flaneur, the prince incognito, right? That is not her terrain. That is not her right. That is not her modernity. Anya.
So would this be like kind of a way for her to get away with painting landscapes, just to put female figures and children in the foreground?
Yeah, but it's also, notice literally the point of view. She really is out there. She's not just constructing it. She lives out there, and so her point of view is not going to be on the Bridge of Europe or at the intersection of the Boulevard Haussmann in rainy day. She's not going to be out there making studies. She's not even going to be the man at the window in Caillat, young man at a window, because she lives out in the suburbs with the children, but she still has some ambition to say, okay, get me off this goddamn floral sofa for a few minutes, please. I'm going outside. And when I go outside, I'm going to construct a modern space that is from an opposite point of view. Rather than being inside Paris, it is being outside Paris looking in. Yeah, Ferris.
Yeah, I was wondering like, if, for example, like Renee from the film, like, who had access to a lot of like in Paris, I guess with Maxime and like a lot of free time, like seminars.
Renee?
Studies, yeah.
Yeah.
She picked up on painting and she was painting what she's seeing. Like she's been to cafes and concerts and parties.
Oh, I love you doing this to me.
Would it be like acceptable or no at that time? Like would people be like, oh, you can't do that because you're like a
Well, she would have had to, for Renee to have, Renee's, you know, standing as a good woman is often a question in terms of some of the behaviors that got her into those spaces were illicit behaviors. But the sense that what if Renee had wanted to be a painter? I love that. Maybe I'll start to rethink this this lecture in the future that way. What if Renee wanted to be a painter? Well, she would have had to bring people with her. But if she painted the illicit, it would have been testifying to her own illicit sexuality. In other words, your painting topics as a woman had to prove your propriety if you wanted to keep that social standing. Now, there are women who are bohemian. There are women who are working class models like Victorine Miron, but more interestingly for us, Suzanne Valadon, a working class woman model who becomes a painter. And she isn't subject to these same restrictions. And as we're going to get to Mary Cassatt is less subject to these restrictions too because she's a rich American expat. But for a good French woman, it's not just what you could get out and see, but whether you should have gotten out and seen it, right? And painting, as we know, isn't just looking. It's about actually having to do studies, stay it for a period of time, making those studies, returning to a studio, doing those studies. It would have been outrageous for Renee to have had that ambition. Sicard would have really not been happy, I don't think. It wouldn't have been considered an appropriately fashionable thing to do, feminine thing to do. These women are already very interesting and even thinking of being a visual artist in this period. Okay, so let's keep going. Do you see how Griselda Policy is also Bertha Morisot? Do you see how this is Summer's Day? Again and again, Pollock can find compositions like this with the kind of compression, in this case in the boat, of women in the foreground and a wider space behind. Now, it's not to imply that men could not be divided in Morisot's painting. Here she's showing us her husband, Eugène Manet, Edouard's brother, looking out at his daughter in the gardens and at a threshold from inside the domestic space, looking out at a girl who seems to occupy at least that edge up to the fence of an outer world. So she could play with these conventions, right? I don't think you would see too many paintings like this by men, although we know Caillebotte shows men at the window. This is interesting in how he's brought into the kind of frothy chiffon curtains of this interior feminine space and is offered just a glimpse. But most famously, Bertha Morisot is associated with these woman at her toilet paintings, which show, as you see, a woman getting herself ready to go out. She would have been able to go out at night with a husband, let's say to the opera. But notice now the way in which a picture like this supports so many conventions about women's vanity, women's narcissism, women only thinking as far as themselves, right? That it's painting is a kind of cosmetics, painting is a kind of act of ornamentation. It can all make the Impressionist mandate seem a little frivolous, seem a little lighthearted, seem a little contaminated by the femininity of Morisot's subjects. Yeah.
Would this have been at all inappropriate? It seems like she's like in her like nightgown and like it's kind of falling off. Like, is that like?
I think that could be a little risque. Yeah, I do think that could be considered a little risque. Now, on the one hand, critics would look at a painting like this and say, Morisot is so wise to paint this subject because this is what she knows best. This is her, right? This is what she does. This is her body. This is the world she knows and that she should paint. And here too. And I want you to appreciate here a couple things. I need to move through a couple points here. One, do you see how open brushed is this picture? Do you see the sheer, that's pretty radical, what's happening with the open brushwork of the space behind this woman. And in general, Morisot becomes associated with a very vibrant, fluttering, open brushwork, okay? Which could be considered more impressionist than many of the impressionists, right? Rather than Manet cleaning it up and solidifying it, here is a woman who's Mallarmé, all is air, you know, the notion of light reflecting off substances. This is a painting that's really good at suggesting the animation of just air and lighting, right? And I want to remind you of this picture. No, this one. To get a sense of, whoa, this lady's just like, open brushwork, right? Just flutter, flutter. Well, partly Morisot could do this. She could create paintings that were so extremely impressionistic because she did not live off her painting. She was a wife. Okay? And she will be one of the most consistent exhibitors at the Impressionist exhibitions. But she is not trying to please dealers. She's not trying to please galleries. She's not, you know, supporting her family as Monet had to do. So when critics start starting to say, you know, these aren't even finished, these pictures, Morisot could disregard that. She could paint as loosely as she wished. So at least she has some fun taking advantage of that. Okay, but let's end Morisot with this picture that was this picture that was a few up on your list. This is the Wet Nurse, 1880. What are we looking at? Come on. Yes, remind me your name. Are you?
Mel.
Mel.
Isn't a wet nurse like somebody who nurses somebody else's baby because the grandma doesn't have time or doesn't want to do it?
Yeah, it's a servant who nurses the baby. Leo?
And the baby's the artists.
And the baby is the artist's. Yeah, this particular painting is Bertha Morisot painting the woman she paid to nurse her baby so that she could what? Paint. Okay. This is the female circumstance. As a woman who nursed my daughter while writing grant proposals to become a professor, but I didn't picture her. Okay, and I nursed her myself. Here is the condition of painting a woman nursing when that woman is a paid servant who is nursing your baby Julie so that you can paint your baby Julie being nursed. Okay? Oh yeah, maybe there's some mirror setup she could have done, but by the way, wet nursing was really normative during this period. Considered a problem because of a high infant mortality rate, but it was very normative for a woman of Morisot's class. This is a weird, fetal little painting, isn't it? It's so awkward. This little mass of pinkness that is the woman and the baby. That poor wet nurse barely has a face, right? What she has biggest is a breast being held by Julie's hand. I don't know if you can see that. And Julie's got a fairly vivid set of cheeks there. But they're kind of plopped in the middle of some part of the backyard. It's an uncomfortable painting, I think. And it's not one that I think Morisot feels sure about her ambitions for it as a painting. Yeah.
How large is it?
I believe it's small, though I've never seen it. I could look it up. Do you know where it is, Alex?
That one I don't know.
Yeah.
Might be at Melbourne Film, but I'm not sure.
Okay. I don't think I've seen it, so yeah. But none of these are big. She's never doing big. But what the wet nurse should draw our attention to is, are we looking at Morisot, painting Morisot here? Come on! Jake.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, at least you rallied.
I always say something like initially, and then like I just have
You
to explain
retreat from it?
myself.
Yeah.
So like it said in the reading that when she did her wet nurse, it wasn't like a weird thing because it was so normal for a woman of her class to have a wet nurse. It wasn't looked upon like, oh, she
Yeah.
It's like as we're looking at it now. So maybe in this way she was depicting something that was normal for someone of her class, perhaps this being normal of someone of her class.
Okay, who wants to argue against Jake that this is Morisot painting herself?
Don't roast me.
Don't roast him. Okay, is Izzy here? Come on, Izzy.
I'm supposed to argue that she's not painting herself?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, how easy is he? Is it? How easy is it to paint yourself like this?
from the back,
Uh-huh.
not easy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not actually, I don't think it's actually her, but it could be like a representation of how she feels as a woman and like.
Okay, yeah,
she
now that's getting
identifies
to a
as-
whole nother step, and I agree with you. The painting could purport to represent her, or to represent her position. But do we think it actually is her? Yeah, Jeremy.
Is there evidence of her using photography in any manner?
Not that I know of. I don't want Jake to talk again. I want some woman to talk. Ellen?
Yes.
Say something to me, Ellen. You think this is her?
I don't think so, just because, well, for me personally, like, I just don't think I've ever seen a view of myself like that, like, from the back, so it seems like.
It would be a very difficult view to find of yourself, even in those department store, like, four-way mirror circumstances. Lydia, do you have anything to add there?
I thought it would be possible if like you did set the mirrors right. Is that
Okay, so it's possible if you set up a whole bunch of mirrors.
right? But that's not.
But let me just say, this is a bourgeois woman with servants. Guess what? These are working class servants modeling for Bertha Morisot. And we're so disinclined to imagine that she hires models because we conflate her painting act with herself. Okay? I don't think you take any picture Kaya Butt painted of a man and say, yeah, it's likely him. Okay? Your inclination to imagine her only painting herself is part of the collapse of identity here. Women artists paint themselves. Pretty, frothy, getting ready to go out. Okay? No, Morisot was a painter. She was trying to be ambitious. Her models were often her family members. You could have guessed, well, maybe Edma modeled for her, but we happen to know some servants did, indeed, model for Morisot. And this would be a very difficult view to capture of yourself, okay? Yet I agree that one of the achievements of the painting is that it makes you think it's her. It gives you that seduction that you're already halfway down the road wanting. Oh, women, beautiful back, talented ornamenter, great at cosmetics, good at little, modest paintings of beauty. Oh, women, I'll buy your picture. Forget it. She had to paint someone who she posed in a position that she could paint over a duration of time. Okay? Not instantaneous. And she does it more than once. So you're looking at a woman artist who actually is fairly savvy that what men will want of her painting and what she's supposed to be able to represent is her milieu. Indeed, herself. But she's having to construct it. And guess what? Class relations are still pertinent. This is a privileged woman. She's paying working class women. So she can't go down into the laundresses and backstage of the ballet. She can't pick up the prostitutes. But she can still rely on working class women to constitute the building blocks of her painting. Okay, now let's go to someone really different. You're looking at Degas at left. Portrait of Mary Cassatt, 1880. And it's so interesting, right, that we've got two major women artists who were friends with major male artists of this period who were of such unlike sorts. And surprisingly, Manet, our feminist, has proven problematic. And Degas, our often potentially described as misanthropic and sometimes misogynist, was deeply respectful of Mary Cassatt. As I give you a quote on the back page, last to the bottom, now notice how twofold this is, of Degas on Cassatt. No woman has the right to draw like that. Typical mixed admiration, right? He thought Cassatt was a splendid artist. He thought she was decisive draftsman like himself. But he also thinks no woman should have the right to do that. Okay? So, let's look at some of Degas' pictures of Cassatt. This is his series, Cassatt at the Louvre. And Cassatt is the figure holding the umbrella. And this is just a great series, right? It's a great series because it really describes this woman who, I give you a little biography on the first page. She's an American painter who lived permanently in Paris after 1874, along with her sister Lydia. Her mother and father moved to Paris in 1877. Unlike Morisot, she intended to earn her living as a professional artist. So remember, the fact that Morisot did not have to earn her living as a professional artist has consequences for her style, right? Here, by contrast, is a woman who does plan to earn her living. She studied art in Philadelphia, France, Italy, and Spain. I have two Frances there, between 1860 and 73. She studied with major artists such as Gérôme and Couture. These are academic artists. And she also continuously studied and painted artworks in museums. She met Degas in 1877. She exhibited in the Impressionist exhibitions of 1879, 1880, 1881, and 1886. Degas having convinced her never to exhibit again in the official salon. Key next line. She never married or had children. Okay, so you need to know, wealthy, foreign, not a mother, not a wife. Okay? And here in this series, I think Degas does a fascinating job of conveying his sense of Mary Cassatt's power. How? Charlotte.
Sorry, I was blinking.
I know you were a little, but just look up at the screen and tell me how Degas constitutes Cassatt's power in this series of her at the Louvre. If she's the one with the umbrella.
Okay. I guess like, well, her body position kind of is like almost like aloof, and it's not showed.
Aloof is what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of like sassy.
Sassy, aloof. Mm-hmm.
And also like she's looking away, so it's like we don't get to see her face.
Yeah, we don't get to see her face. What is she doing in this space? Yeah.
She is the one looking, like she's deciding what she gets to look at and what she wants to, while like the other people in the painting are looking at her, but it's not like the male gaze objectifying her, it's more just like this interest in that like she has the power to like, that her gaze should be respected.
Yeah, now that's complicated, but there is a sense here, and we have a bunch of people who want to jump in. I'll let you keep talking for a while. Both of you women are in a row there, each. Go ahead.
She doesn't have a male chaperone.
Does not have a male chaperone. Yep. Next.
She almost looks like an intellectual, like we were talking earlier about how women weren't seen as intellectuals when it came to painting, but the way that she's analyzing and looking at the paintings.
She almost looks like an intellectual, and given they were considered to be sort of non-intellectual. That's such an interesting assertion, and I agree with you, but where can you locate that in the picture? What makes you say that?
It's hard to like pinpoint an exact thing of how it's painted. Maybe just like the positioning or maybe the
Leo.
She has like, she knows what she wants to see, so she's standing up and like interacting with the painting, so you know, it's intellectual in that way. She knows what she wants to see.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I definitely think we see volition. Maggie, you wanted, and then Izzy?
yeah. I think there's something about like the tilt of her head that kind of makes her look like she's engaged in thought. I don't know what makes it feel
Yeah.
like that, but
Yeah, it's I mean, it shows you that Durante's right about Degas, about what you can know from a back, right? We do feel like we get a lot of sense of her, and we're having a hard time figuring out why. Yeah.
Well, but isn't the flaneur looking at her?
Who is the flaneur here?
Yeah.
Degas. Yeah, we could say once again that he's the one that's able to move through that space. So that's a proposition. There was someone up here, yeah, you, and then Lydia. You, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think she looks really confident, like she's leaning on that umbrella, like
Yeah.
she kind of owns this space, which is different than.
It is an amazing pose, isn't it? And you know, the question becomes, I love the way I try to finally limp out of my bed here. Why does that work so well? You know, that really works. Because it should potentially risk being seen as just a frivolous, fashionable lady, right? A lady who throws out her hips, you know, a Kardashian kind of moment here. Why wouldn't it be seen as, you know, quintessentially just feminine? And yet there's something in both the isolation relative, by the way, she is the foil, right? In all of them. the lady who can't believe her. The lady who can't believe this woman's confidence, her autonomy, her vivacity, her ownership of that umbrella, right? And that sense that she is mobile through the space. And as Leo emphasized, this is no small space to be expressing that mobility and selectivity, right? This is the Louvre. This isn't a department store. She is assessing, she is deciding what to look at, she is considering French art, right? As an artist. And the woman seated continually, and he knows it, serves as the kind of far more passive figure, right? Seated, reading the guidebook maybe? Like, oh, is that a Tintoretto? Oh, is that the Barbizon school? What are they telling me? Cassatt owns that space. She doesn't need a guidebook to teach her how to look at it, right? Okay, so surprisingly, Degas is great at a powerful woman artist. Think of this relative to Manet's portraits of Morisot, where she is a lovely young lady, right? He never flatters her with this powerful a depiction of volition, intelligence, mobility, agency, power. Well, when we look at the paintings, we might feel somewhat disappointed. Although I think this is great. I'm sorry, this is Cassatt. The T. And it should make you see how much she similarly has to rely on family members, domestic scenes in some of her portraits. And we have Morisot below, Cassatt above. But Cassatt is also the one who will paint her sister Lydia at the opera. And you're looking at Renoir's Loge, of course, at left, and Lydia at right. And you know all about this opera space of viewing. And Cassatt seems to sort of revel in her sister's youthful attractiveness in this setting. She has people in the loge seeming to look down potentially at her, reflected in a mirror, by the way, if you're getting confused. But she'll do other pictures like this of Lydia that are more thoughtful, I'd say. And amazing paintings of women as spectacle. She's quite good. She's quite economical. And at her best in a painting like this, two young ladies in a loge of 1882, she's quite magnificent. But it is all domestic scene. I mean, not domestic, good bourgeois scenes. Huh? This isn't a powerful American woman artist who doesn't have to get approval. Although remember, she wants to be a professional artist. Who decides, I'm going to go backstage. I'm going to go do the prostitutes on the Boulevard Haussmann. She's doing the same subjects as Morisot. Yeah.
I just have a question about the use of mirrors.
Mirrors and fans. Yeah.
So why does Cassatt as well as Manet and probably others use mirrors instead of just painting it? Like, what is the comment there?
Well, first of all, the mirrors were ubiquitous. They were there. So people would, you can imagine, they just love the dazzle of spectacle, these folks, right? So that You're sitting at the loge, isn't that enough? You know, with velvet and gold and a show down below and people looking at you. And then there's a mirror behind you. But were often mirrors behind them. Okay. Obviously, mirrors provide artists with interesting ways to do, as in the Cafe Concert, Bar at the Folie Bergère, or here, with that reflection of the shoulders up above, provide artists pre-Picasso with the multiple views, an investigation of some complexity. I think it's a fun game to play, and it's certainly a game characteristic of this culture, right? The doubling of women by these women, I think we should really think about. I haven't read anything good on it, but I think there's something uncanny and weird and eerie about their saying, okay, you like bourgeois femininity? Let me give you 2 of them. Do you remember which one's your wife? Right. Oh. They're kind of unnerving, aren't they? Weird pictures. And then, of course, ultimately, famously, we have Mary Cassatt's view at the Loge, which I believe I've given to you before. Right? I've shown you that? Keep looking. Wow. Good. That was fun. Let me just do it again so I can look at it. She's good. Here is also Cassatt. And this is another part of Griselda Pollock's argument. Look at what Cassatt does. Cassatt paints children. She paints her mother. She paints babies. These are all over the United States museums, sometimes sickeningly so. Okay, what do we make of this? That's a great one. Well, I would say the first thing is to say, and let me see, I think I have a Cassatt quote at the bottom. I love to paint children. They are so natural and truthful. They have no arrière, let's say. They have no afterthought. No afterthought. Why am I putting this up? You, my dear, why am I putting those 2 up against each other? Cassatt and Morisot.
At least for me, the initial contrast I see is the act of tenderness and familiarity with the Cassatt painting on the bottom right with Morisot. It seems very distant.
Yeah, I mean, Morisot's Wet Nurse and Child is like a hovering little apparition compared to that self-evident physicality of intimacy between a mother and a child. You know, these are embodied mothers and children. Okay, that's one contrast. Yeah.
It's so interesting to find out that she wasn't a mother herself, because her classic mother children's paintings are so loving and attached, and must have appealed to like buyers, like family buyers of the time.
Yeah, tell me why. So I think you're absolutely right. It is so interesting that she was not married or a mother compared to Morisot. And as you say, would appeal to people who maybe were mothers. Why would that be so? Can you say more about their position and these paintings? afraid? Yeah.
Do we know anything about like why she wasn't a mother? Because I feel like it's different. Like if it was a personal choice or if it just never.
Clearly a personal choice. I would say that's just what we have to assume. It's a personal choice. But let's keep going. Ferris?
I just want to say it was funny because I read somewhere that Degas also never had a wife or children.
Yeah.
And he believed like artists should be like live just solo because that's the only way to be a good artist.
Yeah.
And maybe you convince her to or something.
Yeah, okay, so Degas and Cassatt neither have spouses or children. Both really admire one another as artists. What makes Cassatt able to paint that painting that way?
Could it be a longing for something like that?
We could say a longing, but we could also say a lack of conflict. As a painter, okay, when she's painting them, she feels she is celebrating them. She is not thinking, I should be holding my baby instead of painting. Okay? She could celebrate all the women and babies around her. I'm sure she adored them. But she constituted herself as a full-time painter. And she was clear about that. That she was a full-time painter. And one of the things she could do was celebrate these bodily relationships. And do you note, by the way, this is a way of depicting eroticism, partial nudity, without having to paint prostitutes, without having to study models in the studio, in academies. She could paint this configuration of mothers and children, right? As a woman who was not failing as a mother by doing so. Yeah.
Would you use family members or working class servants?
Good question. I don't think I know the answer right now. I think there were an array of people. Jeremy?
I was going to say that there's a certain autonomy in the fact that she never had them herself, and so she never had the opportunity to experience the lack of joy in having a child. She can see them in this way and think they're so youthful and wonderful because she does not have to go home and deal with one herself.
She is, yeah, absolutely true. And again, look at Morisot's little nervous, neurotic, sad picture about what it is to be women trying to do both things. Cassatt, by having decided, I'm only doing one, and I'm going to sell a lot of these paintings. And look how happy those other women are. And it's not her sister, as in the Bertha Morisot pictures of her sister Edna pregnant, right? It's not my sister who wanted to be an artist who's pregnant. It's not this incredible, right, conflict, set of tensions between motherhood and painting for Cassatt. And I'm going to finish by just saying, Pollock also makes the argument that Cassatt will take that this is like the Morisots in taking a different point of view, that she's sort of down low with those blue upholstered, whatever they're called, seats, chairs is the word, and can be sort of at the children's level, right? Okay, fascinating women artists. That's enough for today. Oh, wait a minute, on your way out, look at Cassatt du Fatherhood. Ooh, that's so scary. Wow. That is the most frightening thing that's ever